As I continue posting video after video about the brand new Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7, you had to know that at some point I would have to talk about the camera, and that's what we're going to be doing in this video. We're going to deep dive into this camera and talk about pretty much everything I can think of to talk about with this camera. The first thing I want to say is that yes, indeed, it does protrude from the device very, very far. This thing is like 4.2 millimeters thick, and they did put a new 200 megapixel sensor that is larger in this device. And because of those two things, as you can see here in this image, it does stick out from the back of the device quite far. It is a series of 3 bumps on top of another bump. Generally speaking, this has not been really a problem for me. And the biggest reason is because the way I hold my device, the way most people I think hold their phones, is something like this. And the camera bump is way off to the side. So you basically just never touch it. It's not like it was with the Oppo Find N5 or the OnePlus Open, where that camera bump is enormous and sits in the middle of the device. So frequently when I was holding those devices, I was sort of touching it. You can see here with the OnePlus Open, I almost kind of started like supporting the device with the camera bump because of where it is. Otherwise, you're kind of way off here to the side. It just was in the way. Now, that being said, by having your giant camera bump be in the middle, this device would not wobble around on a table. This thing is the wobbliest phone that has probably ever existed. So if you like to set your phone down on a table and then reach over and peck at it or something, maybe while you're eating breakfast or whatever it might be, that's going to get on your nerves. But now we need to talk about the specifications. For a long time, people have been complaining that Samsung was not packing in a good enough camera system. With the Z Fold 7, we do have a couple of upgraded sensors. So how does it stack up? Have they put flagship quality cameras in terms of the hardware specifications in this phone? The answer, kind of spoiler alert here, is yes and no. Kind of sometimes yes and sometimes not yes. I'm going to be comparing it with the Pixel 9 Pro Fold and the Oppo Find N5. Those are the last 2 foldable phones that I purchased. If you want to include the Honor Magic V5 or the latest foldable from Vivo, things are not going to go well for any of those 3 phones. They're all going to get pretty thoroughly trounced by those devices. They kind of almost break these comparisons. So we're going to stick with those 3 because those are the ones that I have here to take photos with to compare. So I've written all of this out in a pretty long article over on shanecraig.tech. I'll put a link to that in the description, but we're going to scroll down and just kind of do this little quick breakdown there at the end. When it comes to the primary sensor, what we have here on the Z Fold 7 is a 200 megapixel sensor that is 1 over 1.3 inches. When you compare that to the Oppo Find N5 or to the Pixel 9 Pro Fold, it is not only higher resolution, it is also physically larger. And because it's 200 megapixels and they use pixel binning, so the pixels themselves are 0.6 micrometers, but they group them together into super pixels. Actually, they're all doing this, Oppo and Pixel. The Pixel is as well. But since it's starting from such a large resolution, the super pixels end up being larger as well. So across the board, just keeping this simple, there is really no way to look at this where the Z Fold 7's primary sensor is not the best on hardware alone. It's not the best primary sensor. When it comes to the hardware of the telephoto camera, I think that the Z Fold 7 does fall behind a little bit. They're sticking with a pretty darn small 1 over 3.94 inch 10 megapixel 3x sensor. Now, while the Pixel's telephoto is also pretty small, 1 over 3.2 inches, it is at least a 5x zoom. So you got to give them an advantage there, really, in both ways. And then the Oppo Find N5 has a 50 megapixel 3x zoom, which is 1 over 2.75 inches. So it's the largest telephoto. It is only 3x, but because of the resolution and the sensor size, it can zoom in pretty far. So there, just on hardware, it's definitely not the Z Fold 7. You can make an argument that maybe it's the Pixel because it's longer range zoom. Maybe it's the Oppo because it's a larger sensor and it's more flexible. You can argue that yourselves, but it's definitely not the Z Fold 7. And then with the ultra wide, again, we're not going to spend much time on that. It's the Z Fold 7. It's got the biggest pixels. It's the biggest sensor. There's really no way to argue that it doesn't have the best ultra wide. Now, again, that's just the hardware. You know as well as I do that the software processing is just as big a part of how the photos actually look as the hardware. So now what we need to do is look at a whole bunch of samples and see what we think. So in my testing so far, the Galaxy Z Fold 7's primary sensor has actually been quite a joy to use. For a long time, Samsung cameras would boost their colors to like near cartoon level. It's absolutely over the top and ridiculous looking sometimes, and that seems like that's really a thing of the past now. Shots pretty much universally looked like how I saw them with my own eyes, with just a tasteful amount of boosting happening to some of the colors and some of the contrast and shadows and things like that. Shots don't appear to be overly sharpened either, which is a thing that some of these Chinese OEMs really lean a bit too heavily into. We'll talk about that a bit more here in a moment. I'll even say that the long-standing issue of shutter lag doesn't really seem to be much of a problem for me. Now, there may be an instance, maybe you have a small child and you're in a poorly lit room and they're moving around and you get some blur. That's going to happen with most phones. But taking shots of my dogs in similar situations have rendered results that were pretty well in focus, sharp, and detailed. Now, one thing that I expected to be improved over the Fold 6 was low light performance. The new sensor is 44% larger. A larger sensor can gather more light. And from what I've seen, that does seem to be the case. In really low light, like scenarios where I quite honestly could not see a thing in front of me at all, it's wild what these phones are able to do, actually outputting a usable shot. My big complaint there would simply be that it doesn't look like the nighttime at all anymore. But if you're in a bit more of a reasonable scenario, taking shots that are simply poorly lit instead of actually in the dark, I was pretty impressed with how well it handled it without having a ton of noise, losing details, colors being washed out. Everything actually looks pretty darn good. When it comes to the telephoto, it is by far the weakest sensor on this device. It is just too small for 2025, and 3x is beginning to just simply not be enough, especially when you have a pretty darn large 200 megapixel sensor. In fact, there are times if you have Scene Optimizer turned on, you can test this yourself, you'll hit the 3x button and it will actually default to that primary sensor with a digital crop. That actually will give you a better result from time to time. So it does that automatically for you. That kind of illustrates the point for me. It's just really not enough at this point. If you're using it to shoot at 3x, it's fine and really nothing more than that. But if you need to go a bit further, 10x or heaven forbid 20x, things are going to start to look like an oil painting really fast. And quick shout out to Ladiesman217 in the Discord server for actually pointing that little bit out about how sometimes we use the primary sensor. I was not actually aware of that. For the ultra-wide sensor, I must admit this is a sensor that I do not frequently use on most phones, but when I do use it on this phone, it does perform quite well. It's the same resolution as the Fold 6, but each individual pixel is larger, and that, again, like I said, means it can gather more light, faster shutter speed, and then less noise, better low light performance, better detail, like any ultra-wide. You're going to start to see a little bit of degradation of quality around the perimeter of each of those shots. You're going to see a little bit of noise on those edges, but by and large, it's fine. The colors remain quite consistent, and I think that the level of detail is quite good. And if you use it as the macro camera, I was able to get surprisingly close to this crepe myrtle flower, and the details surprised me. Pretty solid. Not quite as good as a tele macro like we have on the Find N5, but pretty passable. I'll quickly touch on selfies and portraits. The inner selfie camera and the cover display selfie camera are It's best I can recall the exact same camera, and they do deliver shots that look exactly the same. So I'm not going to show you both because that will be completely irrelevant. They look fine. If you turn on portrait mode, it does a decent enough job of cutting out hair. It looks like a standard Samsung portrait. I will say that if you flip it around and use the primary to take portraits of, other things, like maybe your dogs or other people, portraits do look really, really quite nice there. I've always enjoyed Samsung's blur, their background blur in their portrait mode. In fact, if you've seen a thumbnail on my video, it almost certainly was taken by my S25 Ultra using portrait mode, and it looks basically identical to that. So for me, that's a win. The last thing I want to talk about before we do some quick comparisons is video performance. I shoot a lot of B-roll on this channel. A lot of the time it really amounts to this. I'm talking about a phone, so I grab the phone and I film that phone with another phone. And I almost always end up using my S25 Ultra because it just delivers the best video performance. Whether it was my Open, or it was my Find N5, or it was my Pixel 9 Pro Fold, every once in a while, I would try to use it for B-roll. I would plug it into my video, and I would think, I don't like the way that looks. It looks grainy, or it looks over-smoothed. In the case of the Find N5, it's like, the Find N5 was like, we don't want any noise in our video at all, so we're just going to smooth everything over. There were always things about it that bummed me out. With the Galaxy Z Fold 7, too many phone names bouncing around in my head, I finally have a phone, a foldable, that I can keep in my pocket, that I can pull out and shoot B-roll with. The video is right there with the S25 Ultra for at least my use, the things I've seen so far. So I'm going to show you sort of a little B-roll montage comparison, and then another just sort of raw video to give you a good idea of what the video performance is like. That's a cicada. It's dying, Rosie. It is at the end of its life. You love bugs. Don't try to bite it. They're not for eating. You're weird. No. It's not for eating. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at a series of images back to back to back we can kind of use to compare the Z Fold 7's camera to these other devices. And you can see right here what phone we are currently looking at. This is the Galaxy Z Fold 7. And I'll quickly point out a few things. First off, the colors I think do look fairly accurate. They're really, really quite close. The blue might be a little bit bluer than it is in reality, but it's really quite close with this light on it. That's pretty accurate. If you look back here, kind of pay attention to how the focus is beginning to fall off, because this does have a fairly shallow depth of field compared to those other devices. In the lower light areas, not a lot of noise and grain. I think this does look pretty good. When we go to the next image, which is going to be the Z Fold 6, things have a bit of a warmer look to them. You can see that more is staying in focus. That light all the way back there is still pretty much completely in focus, whereas on the Fold 7, it kind of had this nice shallow depth of field. And then down here in the lower light areas, quite a bit more noise and grain. Hey, it's a larger sensor. That's what we should be expecting, and it's what we're seeing. With the Oppo Find N5, their processing is just really different. I don't really know exactly what they were doing here. It's got quite a moody look to it, which is something I talked about liking about the OnePlus Open. It's not an image I hate, but it's not accurate, right? Like this guitar color isn't quite right. It's very, very dark down here as well. There's like no detail at all, and it's not that dark in real life, so kind of a strange image. And with the Pixel 9 Pro Fold, again, this is an image that I like, but it's kind of got this like hazy look to it, kind of a more yellow shift. It's just not accurate. Like, it's a cool looking photo. It might be my favorite photo of the group in terms of the aesthetic, but it looks like a filter has been applied to it. Not really sure what's going on there. This is a very challenging lighting scenario here for the Fold 7, and I think that it does a pretty good job. One thing that I'll kind of point out is notice how you can see each individual LED light in this bar. Look at the level of detail and how much sort of noise we have, because again, like some of these areas are like kind of in the dark and shadows, and then we have this very odd light in the corner. I'll say that that color is probably pretty accurate. If we go to the Fold 6, it's actually a very similar looking photo, but I think that there is a bit more noise in those shadows. So again, not super surprising. If we go to the N5, the color has kind of shifted in temperature a little bit. It's not handling exposure of it particularly well. The N5 looks like it took this photo to a rave. And again, you might really like the way that this photo looks. It looks cool, but it's not necessarily accurate. And I'll also zoom back into the shadows again and kind of point out that what they do a lot of is just sort of noise reduction. They just kind of smooth things out a little bit when there's too much noise. So again, that might be something that you prefer. You may like the way that looks, or you may like miss the detail that you're losing out on because of that. And in the Pixel 9 Pro Fold, again, the color is just completely different. It's a much more pinkish color than what it actually should have been. And then down here, you can see details okay, noise is decent. I would say it's a pretty fine shot, other than the fact that the colors are just wrong. Now we're going to take a look at that 3x sensor, and this is actually fairly interesting. So again, starting with that Fold 7, let's zoom into this area here because there's quite a bit of like detail in the texture of this upstairs balcony. And look, I think it looks okay. It's fine. There's a little bit of noise in these shadows, but the colors look accurate, especially compared to the Fold 6, which looks very, very blue. It's the same sensor, but the processing is just doing a better job on the Fold 7. Everything else looks pretty much equal. On the Oppo Find N5, which really should win this portion pretty handily, it does, right? Like the detail is just far and away better. The colors look good. The level of noise looks good. 3x, I mean, it's just not really much of a contest. If we look at the Pixel 9 Pro Fold, we're having to do a digital crop at 3x. So it's going to fall pretty far behind, and indeed it does. So in this instance, like low-end zoom, 3x zoom, it's going to go Find N5, then it's going to go Z Fold 7, then Fold 6, then Pixel 9 Pro Fold. But when you go to 5x, things are going to change quite a bit. So again, here at 5x, the Z Fold 7, I think that this is mostly passable, right? Like the detail is pretty good. You do have some noise, probably some noise reduction algorithms going on here as you start to get a little bit of that like oil painting look, but it's fine in good lighting. On the Fold 6, much is the same, but it's blue again for some reason. On the Find N5, because we have that larger sensor, the detail is still pretty good. We're starting to get a slightly hazy look to things, but overall, I think that this does look quite strong and does look better than the Z Fold 7. And then when we get to the Pixel, which actually has a 5x telephoto zoom, it now jumps back into the lead, and I think it pretty clearly has the best level of detail, noise, colors all look really quite good. So it's a matter of like, how far are you zooming? If it's sort of a low-end zoom, 3x, the Pixel is going to be terrible. But if it's 5x, it's going to win. So guys, at the end of all of this, just to kind of wrap things up, the primary sensor is great. I really like the shots it delivers. I like the videos that it delivers. Samsung absolutely needs to do more with zoom. It either needs to be a much larger 3x like what Oppo has done, or preferably like what OnePlus did a couple of years before that, where they had an even larger 3x zoom. That would be fantastic. Or they could go with the 5x route like they've done on the S25 Ultra. That is what I want to see them do. The Ultrawide is absolutely fine as well. Overall, I am pretty happy with the camera and video, just overall camera performance of the Galaxy Z Fold 7. This is not a device that when I am out with it and I have to pull it out and quickly take a photo of something, that I'm going to be disappointed. Unless the object is really far away, and then I'm going to run into some problems. But in general, just taking photos, I think you're going to be fairly satisfied. Look, the sensor, most of its used most of the time is the primary, and the primary is really, really good. Still some things I need to improve on. Maybe that's the Galaxy Z Fold 8, but for the 7, those are my thoughts. That's where we're at. Hopefully that gives you guys some good information to make a decision if you want to get this phone or not, or maybe you just wanted to know how the camera was because you were curious. Either way, Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more content like this, and until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.